Welcome back to Jacques in the Garden. Today we are doing some seed starting for that time period between summer and fall where you're not really sure what you should be starting. Turns out most of it is going to be fall related planting, things that you traditionally will grow in the winter time, and that's because every single season, every single year is a little bit different. They might all start technically on the same date, but whether it's hot, cold, rainy, or dry, all of that changes every single year. So you have to kind of plan your garden around that uncertainty. And that is why this time of year, I tend to lean more on a lot of flowers, a lot of herbs, but I am still starting a lot of leafy greens, major harvest things like broccoli and cauliflower. So let's talk about everything I'm starting now, why I chose that variety, and why I'm choosing to start those plants at this time period. Let's kick it off by starting all of our herb seeds right now. These are things that I call herbs just because I use them to season other parts of my cooking. Whether they're technically herbs or not, I'm not entirely sure, but for me, they're classified as herbs. And the first thing we're going to be starting is actually celery. This is called moringa. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to taste, but every single celery I've had is pretty similar. Now, homegrown celery is extremely convenient. If you guys haven't tried growing it, I highly, highly encourage it. This is a great time to do it because celery is something that requires cool weather, lots of water. So starting it at the end of summer so that it's really filling out come wintertime, and by the time you get into early spring, really quite full and pumping out lots of stalks. The beautiful thing about growing celery at home is that you don't need to use the entire celery plant at once. So most of the time when you go to get celery, you go to the grocery store, you buy yourself a bunch of celery, and you use a couple stalks for whatever it is that you're cooking, and the rest of it just kind of goes bad in the back of your fridge. The beautiful thing about growing celery at home is that you could just peel off one stalk at a time as needed. The whole plant stays alive while it's growing in the garden, and you get exactly how much celery you need. Now, one thing I'll mention about this particular seed is that it is pelleted. So what that means is that instead of looking like a normal seed, they're these tiny little white balls. And most of the time that's like something inert, whether it's some sort of starch or maybe a clay. And the main reason that kind of thing exists is because it's easier to seed for smaller seeds or seeds that you might run through a machine that helps you seed them. So if you're ever wondering why you got a pelleted like little white ball for a seed, that's exactly why. A couple things I should point out at the start here is that the soil that I'm using is a new one to me. It is something that is, I believe, entirely peat-free, so it has a lot of these kind of rough hairs out of it, and that is the coconut coir that is making up the bulk of that material. Now, the things that I'm using here are 6 cells, which I'm doing for most seeds, and then anything where I'm sowing a lot of it or they're really small seeds, I am going with the 16 cell here, which is, of course, 16 individual cells. So the next one, King Richard leeks. I normally don't start them at this time of year, but I'm very curious to see how they do when they're grown in the fall to winter period in San Diego. For some reason, I feel like I think it'll work. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a try, and I'll let you guys know how it worked. But what we're gonna do here is probably still multi-sow our leeks. And what that means is that I'm putting 2 to 3 seeds per cell. And when I go to transplant this in the garden, I could just take that entire plug and plant those 3 leeks together as is. The beautiful thing about this is that it's easier, first of all, to transplant 3 leeks instead of 1 every single time. The other nice thing is that you could harvest the smallest one when it's ready, leave the other 2 to keep bulking up. It's just a really nice system. They won't make the biggest leeks, they'll tend to be a little bit smaller, but for convenience of planting, and even convenience of harvesting, like a small leek when you don't need that much, it's really quite nice. So I'm going in with about, again, 2 to maybe 4 seeds per cell. And if I only get 1, that's fine, I'm happy with that. But if I get all 3, then I'm also very happy to plant that out as is. The next seed that we're going with is another type of allium, and that is green onions. This is called white Lisbon. They're bunching onions or scallions. And I really just don't know what it is, but they never seem to come up very well for me. So again, I'm gonna go with the 16 cells here. And I'm just going to be scattering some amount of seed, somewhere between like, I don't know, 2 and 6 per cell. Because with green onions, you could really put them in nice and tight. Doesn't really matter, there's no downside to it. So that's going to be my strategy here. Hopefully they come up this time. If not, I guess I'm just cursed and I can't grow any green onions. Next up, we have some fennel. This variety is called Romanesco. I believe it's a very standard, typical variety. This is if you want to grow fennel for the bulb, which occasionally we do eat. I'm not going to lie, it's not like a big thing for us, and I have a lot of volunteer fennels that always come up on their own, but I like to have a couple every year that I could plant on purpose on the off chance that we do decide to eat them. So that's why I'm going in with this right now. It's a really good crop for this time period. They seem to do really well in that sort of shoulder season. They will grow in the summertime, of course, but then they'll tend to produce seed, which is fine because I will eat the seed at that time period, but right now I'm looking for the bulb. So the next one that we're planting is another herb. This one's dill, it's the bouquet dill. And why it's called bouquet dill is because it makes a very large flower head. This is great for making pickles, and right now, at the tail end of summer, I do have a decent amount of cucumbers on the way, so having some flower heads for making pickles would be quite nice. The next one here is chives. Chives are really delicious, of course, you know them. They're basically little tiny green onions that also have a very delicious flower. So for me, I am doing a 6-pack here because I don't really need a 16 of them. They tend to bunch on their own and actually propagate and get bigger over time. So I'm just going to scatter a little sprinkle of seeds in each cell, and we'll see what we get. Next up, I have some cilantro. Cilantro is actually a really good thing to grow in the fall and winter because, contrary to popular belief, which is just, I think, based on the fact that we all want salsa in the summertime when we have tomatoes and peppers, but cilantro actually does best in cooler, cold weather. That is going to be what stops it from bolting or going to flower so early, which is a very common problem with cilantro. And if you've had a problem germinating cilantro in the past, what I recommend you do is you take these seeds, before you actually put them in the cell, put them between your fingers and give them a pinch until you hear or feel a little snap. That's going to break that outer seed coat, let the water in, and it should improve your germination rate and speed as well. The last one is, like I said, an allium, and it's one that I mentioned previously. It's a new variety, it's called sweet garlic, and it's sort of a hybrid between garlic and leeks. So obviously, how can you go wrong with that? It sounds amazing. This is, again, going to be something that's typically grown in the springtime. And my last experience, actually, a lot of what I sowed in my last video, I had to re-sow right after. I chose not to re-sow this one because I knew I would do it again soon, right in this video. But a lot of the seeds that I ended up putting in the greenhouse got a little bit too hot and actually got roasted. And I got very, very poor to little to no germination out of those. So now this is a much better time to try them out. Summertime was kind of a weird experiment on my end. This time it actually makes sense to get these going right now. Now let's transition into the sort of main crop, the big harvest, things where you're harvesting the entire plant at once. And that is going to be things like broccoli, cauliflower. So let's get right into it. The first one is going to be a weird one. It's actually something I've never grown before. This was a gift to me from Fluid and Garden. You might have seen her on the main Epic Gardening channel, also known as Chris. She sent me this packet of 9-star cauliflower. What this is, or what it's supposed to be, is a perennial that produces little florets. And actually, I think it's closer to broccoli than cauliflower. I don't know why it's called cauliflower. I remember there being something weird about the name. But the short story is that it is a perennial that produces little florets you can harvest as needed, and apparently pretty tasty. So this seems like a good time to test this out. I'm going to sow pretty heavily here. I'm going to only use half of a 6 cell since it's a perennial, but I'm going to be putting at least like 4 seeds per cell because these seeds are from 2021. And honestly, I probably haven't kept them in the best storage conditions. So I want to overseed to improve my odds. That's basically the strategy you want to go in with if you have something that either it's an older seed or you're not very sure if you stored it well and you don't think the germination is going to be good. Just go ahead and bump the amount of seed that you're putting in that cell, and that should really take care of that problem for you. The next one is going to be a little bit of a weird one, and most people are not going to be able to do this in their homes, but it's actually the early girl tomato. So yes, I am still starting tomatoes at this time of the year, as crazy as that might sound. The early girl is one that it's known for producing in the colder seasons, earlier in the season. That's why it's called early girl. And of course, I have this greenhouse now, so I might as well try pushing my season in that greenhouse. I already have a lot of peppers and cucumbers growing in there, but I really want to try getting some tomatoes. And I actually really quite like the taste of early girl tomatoes. I think they're a quite good standard issue tomato that is very accessible to everyone. And also they're classically grown for dry farmed methods where you can really concentrate their flavors and really make them sing. So we'll see how that works. I've never tried growing anything more than a cherry tomato into the fall winter season, which by the way, totally works if you're in somewhere like zone 10 plus. You could get away with cherry tomatoes for most of the year. So now let's get into some more traditional stuff. The first one's going to be this clementine cauliflower, which is just a cheddar style cauliflower that I've been getting at Johnny's. There's plenty of other options out there for cheddar cauliflower, but personally, we just find that the yellow varieties taste better. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's like a weird personal preference on our end or what, but again, right now, If it was true fall, like it is going to be in about a month when I start those seeds, I would be starting probably at least 12 of these. Right now I'm starting just 6. And the idea is, again, like I mentioned at the start, is if it is a cool end to summer and actually pretty chill fall, not very hot, then these will do really, really well, and I'll be able to harvest them come December, which is really quite fun to harvest big vegetables in December. If it's really hot and they die, no big deal. I'm going to start a second round anyway coming up in the next month. This next one, I'm only going to start 3 cells for because I don't even know why I'm growing it. Every year I say I'm not gonna bother this year, but since I'm early, there's a chance that this will actually work, and that is the Brussels sprout. The reason why I'm so iffy on growing Brussels sprouts in my garden now is not because I can't get them. Every year I do get them, but the quality just isn't as good as Brussels sprouts grown in the area where they should be growing, something like right on the Central Coast up by like Santa Cruz, where they just crank out Brussels sprouts year after year. But here, what happens is that if I wait too long and they don't get ready until spring, it gets too hot, they get covered in aphids, and then there's just really not anything to eat. Since I'm here early enough, I'm gonna go ahead and give them a go and try to grow at least 3 to 4 plants, and we'll see how it does. Next is going to be cabbages, and this is the Copenhagen market cabbage, a classic variety that I've been growing every single year that produces really well for me. And I'm only gonna do 3 again because cabbages are large plants and I don't really wanna waste that space if it ends up being a hot fall. But if I get 3 that are ready in winter, again, that's going to be a great bonus for me. Now, when we're getting into these next categories, things like this cauliflower here, I'm going to be much more selective when I can. This one in particular is called Twister, and it is known for being able to withstand the heat and grow in mild climates into the winter time. So this is quite ideal for somebody like me here in San Diego, but also if you just want to get a head start on your cauliflowers, you want to choose something that is heat tolerant so that it can handle that sort of late summer heat before we get into the proper fall season. And I'm going to be doing just 3 of them. Again, I'm not ever going to be going hard on any of these plants this early in the season, but I would love to get them established. So Twister is the first one, and I think I have at least 1 more in the bunch. Next up is another classic cabbage. This is one that I love to grow every single year, just like the Copenhagen, and as the red acres cabbage. The one thing I truly, really appreciate about this cabbage, more than any other cabbage I've grown, is that it has the amazing capacity to sit out in your garden fully ripe for like a month or 2 months after the fact without splitting or getting weird and gross. So this is really a fantastic cabbage for holding out in the garden. Now we're getting into the world of broccoli, and again, I'm choosing a variety that can handle some heat. So Belstar is a very classic one. It even says right on the front, it's a compact broccoli, handles heat stress better than most others, and it produces great side shoots. Now, if you've heard me talk about broccoli before, I'm all about the side shoots personally. I think that's where a lot of the really nice, delicious, sweet broccoli flavor is. They don't sit around as long. They grow very quickly, and it's very easy to go out and grab a couple to make a meal for like lunch, or maybe at dinner time, you grab a bunch of little side shoots, just throw them on a sheet pan, you don't have to do any cutting, and it's just much easier for me in the kitchen, and you don't get all that like little broccoli floret stuff all over your cutting board. So I love me some side shoots. Of course, the main head is what a lot of people like as well. So best of both worlds with a variety like Belstar, because you'll get the main head first, and then you'll get tons of little side shoots after that first harvest. Another option, if you're somewhere where it's still a little bit too warm to even risk growing heat-tolerant varieties, is to try something like Kailan, which is a Chinese-style variety. It's a cross between, I don't remember exactly what, but it's a cross between broccoli and maybe some type of mustard. And it's really nice because they'll make these nice long shoots with a nice big leaf right next to it, and you could eat the entire thing, saute them whole. Really good. They produce a little bit faster, and they can handle some heat quite well, which makes them really well suited for the shoulder season in particular. This next broccoli variety has quickly become one of my favorites, if not my favorite. I raved about it all last year, and that is the burgundy broccoli. There's something incredible about this variety, and that is the sheer number of little florets that it could produce. It is absolutely staggering. Last year, especially when I grew it over the winter into spring, I was getting like 100 floret shoots coming off each plant. Whenever somebody came over, I was like, please take this beautiful bouquet of broccoli florets home because there's so much, I don't know what to do with it. It looks really cool in the garden, as the name suggests, it is purple in color. The one thing I'll mention though is that things that are purple in color while they're growing when you cook them, will tend to turn green, and that's true for this as well. So don't be surprised when you go to cook it that it turns green again. That's just the way that color sort of behaves in vegetables. But very delicious, very prolific. I will make one more appeal because it is a little bit more expensive than the other seeds. I think it's 10 seeds for $5, which I get it. It's a lot for a seed comparatively, but this produced, unlike anything else I've ever had, by far like 5 times the production of any other side shoot broccoli. So highly encourage, at least give it a try if you've never tried anything like that before. It'll probably do really well for you. The next thing for me is some broccolini. We are working on trying to get some broccolini on the Botanical Interest store, but for now I am growing this one variety, which it is called Melody. It's just a broccolini. So a broccolini versus a broccoli is something that produces a looser floret. They tend to be a little bit more elongated. The stems are more tender and sweet. You kind of eat the entire plant in that sense. You eat a lot more stem than you would with like a broccoli. Of course, you could eat as much broccoli stem as you want, but with broccolini, you are intended to be eating the stem with the floret and even the leaf. It's kind of like the kailan, but it's more bred to be more broccoli-like rather than like a mustardy broccoli. Absolute favorite for me. Sautés up really nice, roasts up really nice on a sheet pan. All around, very delicious. So next up, I had to grab one of our 4-inch pots. These are really ideal if you're growing like a pepper that's transplanted up and you want to hold it for a while before planting it. This is really an ideal size for that, but it's also really good for starting a bigger seed and something that you're not going to be potting up all the time. In this case, another weird one that only really probably applies to me, and that is that I'm going to be trying to grow some Emerald Delight, which is one of my favorite summer squashes. Yes, a summer squash zucchini planted right now, but again, I'm going to be trying it in the greenhouse. I'm not sure if this is smart or dumb, if we have enough sunlight for it to even produce fruit, but what's the harm in trying one plant in the greenhouse? It's really not going to cost me much space. It's not going to take up any soil more than anything else. So for me, it's worth the experiment to see if I could harvest some little baby zucchinis during the winter months. It's just going to be a little fun experiment for me. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2 seeds in here to hedge my bets. If both of them come up, I'll go ahead and split them and I'll plant both out in the greenhouse. But just a little fun side adventure for me. And definitely ask me how they're going later on in the winter time, because I'm also very curious to share how they're doing with you guys as well. Before we get back into the world of vegetables, because I have a lot of different leafy greens that I'm really excited to grow this year, many of them which are new to me, I want to hit some flowers. This year, I honestly feel like I don't have enough flowers to make me happy. I definitely have some flowers here. There's a lot of straw flowers. The blanket flowers here have done really well for me. Alyssum, Mexican sunflowers, regular sunflowers. But in general, I haven't had a very diffuse palette of colors. It's been more of the orange tones, which of course I love, and actually we'll be starting more of them, but I also wanted to mix it up a little bit. So some of these flowers, I've literally never grown the type before, like the actual species of flower of any capacity. So they're going to be new to me, and I'm not sure how they're gonna go. So let's do it together. And it's a pretty good stack of flowers here. The first flower we're doing is called Love in a Mist, and this is called Miss Jekyll Blend. Now I do like the color palette here of like sort of baby blues to whites to sort of purple blues. So let's go ahead and try this. Looks like caraway. I think if I remember correctly, this is actually a type of caraway. I don't know if this variety is actually edible, but I feel like I've tried growing this before and they did come up, but I think I grew them in the summertime, which is not their main jam. They do prefer the spring and fall period. So maybe this will work now. I'm gonna go ahead and overseed like crazy because I just don't know how germination is on something like this. It's a new thing for me. So that's the first one that's new. The next one is going to be a Lobiella. I don't know if I even pronounced that right. I have grown these before from transplants that I got at the nursery, and I really grew to love them because they had a lot of tiny flowers that really held on for a long time, and they offered these kind of blue tones, which are a little bit harder to get in the more standard traditional flowers that you might grow on a day-to-day basis. So what I'm going to do here before putting them in is I'm going to pick off even the slightest chunk of a material from the surface, because these seeds are so small that if they're not on soil, I don't see how they're going to get enough water to germinate. I'm also going to press down the soil a little bit to make it a nice, welcoming, hard surface for these seeds that they can't get out. I'm going to give this a little pinch here and try to shake loose some seeds. They're so small that I don't think the camera could even catch this if I was fully zoomed in. But I could see teeny little, it looks like I'm sprinkling salt out of a tiny packet to like just barely season something. So there we go. I definitely saw some fall into each thing. The tricky thing with these kinds of things where they have really small seeds is actually watering them. I suggest watering them using something like the mist setting, and especially something like this that takes 15 to 20 days. That's a pretty long period of time for a tiny seed to survive on the surface without getting buried. So I might even add some vermiculite after the fact, but what I'm doing right now is just pressing along the surface here to make sure that if the seed did fall, that it is actually touching some nice wet soil. This is another flower that was new to me this year. It's something that I bought as a transplant, and I got them because they look like tiny little snapdragons, quite adorable in the garden. They come in a lot of different colors. And one of the things that I found interesting when reading this packet is that it says that it blooms heaviest in cool weather. So right now should be a really good time to start them. This warm period will help them establish and grow. And then as they ease into that fall period, I'm hoping to get tons and tons of really cool blooms out of these. So that's why I'm doing a full 6-pack here, because I definitely want to get as much of this color in the garden as I can. This variety is called Fairy Bouquet. And the cool thing about it is that it has a mixture of different sorts of colors all throughout there. So there's reds, there's pinks, and I think there's oranges as well. And this seed is probably comparable to Linaria, quite small indeed. It doesn't say that it needs light, but what I'm going to do is just simply press them in as the instructions suggest. Now this one's 10 to 20 days, a little bit better than the last one, but we're gonna keep those kind of seeds together so I can make sure to water them on the mist setting and not wash all that seed away by using something like the shower function. Now this is the time of year that's really, really great for calendulas as well. Calendulas do really well in the spring, but I've noticed that some of my calendulas have actually been reblooming right now in the summertime, which made me think like, why not start some more and just see if we could get some blooms going into this fall winter period. So this is a variety that I really like. I've grown in the past. It's called Pacific Apricot Beauty. So Pacific Beauty is the standard variety that's more of like a traditional orange. And the apricot one has a little bit of like pink blended into it, which is really quite lovely. So we will be growing actually the classic variety as well, because I love having that around. But I just love those apricot-y, peachy colors. They're some of my favorite in the garden. Now we have another Lobelia, but this one is a trailing variety. So this is going to be really, really fun, because my plan is to put them on the edges of my green birdies beds there and let them trail down and provide tons of beauty by cascading down my garden bed, because it has whites, pinks, blues, that sort of babyish blue color. And it's, I think, gonna look really, really nice contrasting my green beds there. So we're definitely gonna do another 6-pack of these. And I'm really hoping these work. These tiny seeds are kind of a pain to get going in the garden. But when they do emerge, it's just really satisfying and fun to know that you went through that process to get those cool varieties. Here's another new variety to me that's new in terms of something I've never grown in my actual garden before, and just a new variety, and that is an aster, the king-size apricot aster. Of course, I just told you guys I love those peachy kind of colors, so this will be a fun one to try. It doesn't seem like it has anything special about its instructions, and I'm going to be doing just 3 of them since they're new to me, and I don't even know if this is going to be an optimal time for them to really get going. Now, another one that I've grown in the past that I really quite like the color of is this Orange Wonder Snapdragon. You could tell I have a favorite color type, and that's that apricot kind of orange pink colors. Something about them just really contrasts nicely in a sea of green that your garden traditionally has. So we're gonna go ahead and do a bunch of these. I'm gonna just commit, no, you know what, I'll just do 3 cells here because they're a little bit tricky to get going. They come out so small that they're really actually a little bit of a pain to maintain when they first arrive on the scene. So if you've ever had tricky time growing snapdragons, go ahead and throw your seed pack in the freezer for 48 hours and then try and see if that works out for you. I'd be very curious to hear if that works for others. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. A lot of seeds require a cold period before they actually germinate, and this must be the case for something like a snapdragon. So that's going in right there. Now we're gonna go in with some violas. Now I have grown violas a little bit in the past. I tend to grow them around this time period, and they actually look quite nice. I like the fact that the flowers, the plants themselves are never that big, but most of the colors on violas, I have to admit, I find very cheesy, and I don't appreciate them. But this one, I like. It's called Cool Summer Breeze. Let me show you the packet here. Got a really interesting mix of colors. And it's not just like a intense color, but it has like some white diffusion in it, which I think is gonna really help it look nice and balanced in the garden. These are really nice for putting on the edges of your raised beds because again, they don't really take up that much space. They tend to pop up a couple flowers that then dangle over the edge of your bed, which looks quite nice. And now we're back in the world of calendulas with one of my favorites I talk about every year, and that is the Zeolites blend. I love the color mix on here. I love the fact that the back of the flower looks different than the front. Those are the kind of flowers that really get me going because it's just so much fun to be surprised by them. When you look at the bottom of them, you might see like a totally different color tone, and then you flip it over and it looks much darker, like it can't possibly be on the same flower petal, but yet it is. So these are one of the ones that I grow every single year without fail, and just easily one of my favorites of all time. The next one is one that I haven't tried growing at this time of year, and that is actually a straw flower. This was a new variety that I saw. It's called King Size Red, and it has this really sort of deep red maroon color to it, which just looks so cool. I got it from Johnny's, that's where I saw it, and we'll see if it works. Unfortunately, the thing with Johnny's is that their seed packets don't have very good information, especially about the specific varieties. So right now, I'm just winging it. I don't remember what straw flowers need. I'm just gonna sow them like I would anything else. So if that's wrong, maybe it's not great, but I don't think it says anything special on here. So we're gonna just assume that that's how it goes. Now, this one is a very, very, very classic blend, and that is the Pacific Beauty blend. I actually have the Apricot Pacific Beauty blend that I already started. But the cool thing is that this is, again, a mixture of colors, so it's all gonna be a surprise. You don't know what you're gonna get. And that could always be a little bit of fun. You get oranges and yellows. The Pacific Beauties, they do really well here in San Diego, I find. I like the structure of them. The leaves tend to look a lot nicer than some of the other varieties that I've grown. I think they're like a little bit bigger. So definitely a very pretty plant and one that I'm always excited to have in my garden. Now we are getting into the world of cosmos here. I've selected 3 different cosmos. The reason why I'm growing the cosmos is because I think it was last year I was over at Kevin's house and it was the winter time and his candy cane striped cosmo was full bloom, covered in flowers when nothing else was. And I made a mental note to remember that next year I want to try growing it in the winter time to see if I could get that similar thing to happen to me. So we're gonna go in with, this is a new variety to me. This one's called Rubenza. It has a really nice dark color to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do 6L, I've decided, full 6L, because I don't have this color represented in any of these other flowers that we've started so far. And as I mentioned earlier, I really want some more contrast in my garden. When you have just a sea of green, which is what you tend to get, especially in the winter time, where you don't really have any fruiting or flowering plants as much, having a nice pop of dark red is really going to stand out so much more in the garden. And that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for at this time of year. Now this is one that I have grown before. No surprise here, it's called Apricota. So that's definitely my color palette revealed. And now that I've planted all these, I'm starting to really truly understand how much I like this color because it is heavily featured here across all of these flowers. So this is something I've never started at this time period again, and that is yarrow. This is called Summer Pastels. Has a mixture of different colors. I've really, really come to appreciate yarrow. I have a lot of it that I can see right now in my native garden that's in full bloom in the middle of summer while everything else looks a little bit sad. Last cosmos, this one is called Xanthos. Quite the dramatic name there. The thing that I didn't mention about the cosmos earlier that I really appreciate about them actually, I don't know why I don't grow more of them. This year I don't have any, it's kind of sad, is that they're very drought tolerant. They can really handle the heat. They could handle not having a lot of water totally fine. They don't seem to skip a beat. And this is another example of a color palette that I'd like to add to my garden for more contrast. It is a sort of brightish white yellow. It should stand out really, really well on a backdrop of green. So that is kind of my framework. That's what I'm thinking of when I'm choosing these flowers this year, is I really want contrast, I want separation. I want things to really stand out and pop when they can, instead of just having to rely on the old classics that I've had in my garden for a long time. So last one here is a viola. It's Corsican violet. So a nice purplish color. Again, the violas, the lobelia, those are the kinds of ones where I tend to find purple is very easy. The only other purple I really have in my garden, actually there's a lot of purple flowers. I have borage, I have the Felicia, that's really wonderful. And of course I have my giant Prides of Madeira, but those are for a short period of time. So for the winter time, the violas and the lobelia are really ideal for this season. Had to break out another tray. This is turning out to be quite the epic seed starting session here, but we're in the home stretch because we are now doing leafy greens, things that are easier to consume, faster to produce, and produce more regularly. That was quite the flower slog there. So now let's get into some greens. The first one is going to be Bloomsdale spinach. This is a really ideal time to get this started. The thing with spinach is that it literally cannot grow if it is too sunny. It will just automatically go to flower no matter what you do. The cool thing that's also nice about spinach is that it can produce in full winter, covered in snow, no problem whatsoever for spinach. Not that that's a problem for me, I should say. So let's go ahead and do 16 cell of the Bloomsdale spinach. It's quite a big seed here, but I want a lot of plants. If you've ever cooked spinach before, you know that you'll throw a giant bag straight into the pan. You'll be like, there's no way we can eat all this. And then it all just turns into a single cup once it wilts and starts to really get cooking. So I want a lot of it. That's why I'm doing 16 at a time instead of a 6 cell. If I only had a 6 cell, I would never be able to get enough spinach to make a meal out of it. So we're going big and we're going in with 16 here. The next thing I'm starting is Oceanside spinach. So I have Bloomsdale, Oceanside. Figured I gotta go Oceanside since Oceanside's in San Diego. But one thing I want to note about spinach before we move on from it is that it will not germinate if the soil temps are over 85 degrees. So when I have a small amount of soil, like I do in the 16 cell here, if this is out in full sun in the peak of summer, it's really not going to have a good chance of germination. So this might be something I even place in some spotted shade to improve the odds of germination. And again, we're just trying to get it to grow into the winter period. I'm not expecting a harvest anytime soon, but if you waited a little bit longer, or if your cold season's coming sooner than it is for me, then another great thing you could do is grow it as baby spinach. And that only takes something like 3 weeks from once it's germinated to being able to harvest those little baby spinach leaves. Now again, if you do a baby spinach, you're gonna wanna grow a lot of it because you're not getting a lot from each leaf. So keep that in mind if it's something you wanna try. But the nice thing about spinach is that you get quite a lot of seed in each pack. So it's definitely something that's doable. And now I'm very happy to say that we have the perpetual spinach on offer. This is something I've talked about for a very long time. I've been calling it this green chard, Biotella da Costa Fine, something like that. And this is our analog. This is the one that we're adding to fill that gap because it's a seed that we just never had, and it's something that I've really, really loved having in the garden. Now, the next one is going to be Mizuna. This is one of the only mustards I tolerate. I don't know if it's because it's smaller, but it's not as intense of a mustard. It's really wonderful on top of soups. It's even good on pizzas. It's good in salads, mixed in a little bit. It's just really quite wonderful. So Mizuna, if I am going to be growing a mustard, it's going to be this one. It's just the best mustard I've ever tried. It's not going to be as scary as some of the other ones. So we're going to be over here in the 16 cell land for a while, because next up we have some lettuce. This is Marvel of Four Seasons. I chose this one because it is one that could handle both heat and cold weather. So this is something that's really great if you're someone where it's really warm and then all of a sudden it gets really cold and then you enter winter. Now for me, I'm never going to get truly really cold, but having the option for a lettuce that can handle some of that summer heat as well as tolerate the cold once it gets there is what I'm looking for. If you're somewhere where, again, you have those stronger swings in the season, this is probably gonna be what you want, because cold weather can be bad for some lettuce, hot weather can be bad for some lettuce. This one can tolerate both. And it also actually looks really pretty at the same time. So this one is a new one to me. It looks like a lettuce that you would find in a fancy spring mix. It's called Israela, I believe. And it has this really sort of dainty, small foliage. It almost looks like you're harvesting a bunch of small arugula leaves that are actually lettuce. So I'm very excited for this. I like the idea of it being something frilly that you don't have to even cut. You could just go chop the whole plant, wash it, throw it in your salad bowl, and you're ready to go. You don't have to pre-chop that lettuce into those little annoying strips that are then hard to get on your fork. It's very easy to grab these entire leaves. Because of the way it grows, it actually seems like it'll be a wonderful salad to dress and a much easier salad to eat, which sounds kind of silly that would be something that I'm worried about. But it's just one of those like little things where it's just appreciate the little things in life. And this is a pelleted seed, by the way. So that's why it looks so big. It's like that thing I mentioned at the beginning. This looks like it's coated in some sort of clay. I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure it says it on the packet. But if you ever get this, again, it's not anything wrong with the seed. It is pelleted on purpose. And that is, again, to make it easier to handle for machinery, for other things like that. All right, now we're getting into something I've never tried growing here in the garden, but I have ate before. and that is radicchio. Now, honestly, I've got to say it's never something that I reach for, but whenever you have that like spinach artichoke dip with a little radicchio leaf, you're like, oh, actually, I do like this. So this year I want to try growing it. Even though I never like seek it out to purchase it, I can appreciate it in a good sort of charcuterie board or some other preparation like that. A little bit of bitter helps with digestion is what they say, and this is definitely going to be a bitter green. The next three are all going to be the same plant, but different varieties, and that is kale. I have the red Russian, very classic, my favorite for making salads. I have the Nero de Toscana or Lacinato dinosaur style kale. This is really great for sautés and for soups. And then we have the dwarf blue curled kale. Curly kales, again, really wonderful for soups and especially good for making kale chips. And now is a great time to start them. They will taste better as you get into the winter period, but having them grow now will establish a nice big root system. And come winter, when you're ready to eat that kale, you're going to be getting an abundance. So that's why I highly encourage you guys get that started now. If you want kale, or if you want to try kale, now's the time to do it. The last couple seeds we're going to be talking about that are starting in cells instead of direct sowing are actually all going to be root vegetables. This is things like the Detroit dark red beet, the golden boy beet, and then a new favorite of mine, which is the robin beet, which produces a smaller beet ideal for making pickled beets. So I'm gonna get these started, but let me grab some of my in-ground seeds and I'll show you my strategies and picks for which ones I'm doing this year. In terms of things that I'm growing directly in ground and not transplanting, the first one is actually peas, and I've selected one of each of the different classes of peas. First we have shelling, where I've chosen Wando. Wando is known for handling heat, so it's really good for this sort of late summer into fall period. In terms of the actual snow pea, I have Oregon Sugar Pod number 2. This one is listed as a variety that's great for growing in the fall period for winter preservation and storage. And then lastly, I have Sugar Daddy, which is, I believe, yep, the snap pea. And this is another one that could handle that sort of late summer into fall period. And all of these should produce really well, and they all are absolutely delicious. I've grown them all before. I'm going to be planting them up along fences like I'm showing right here. And I'll be planting them very densely, something like 2 inches apart. And yep, that's actually what they recommend on the seed packet as well. So peas, highly encourage you guys try them. At least try some shelling peas once. They are so sweet and delicious, highly underrated. The next group of plants that I'm starting always in ground and never transplanting is actually carrots. I have 4 different varieties here for you. They all have a different sort of use case to them. First, I have the Shin Carota, which is classically a very sweet, nice, thick, delicious carrot. That is one of the reasons I'm growing it, is how sweet it is. Then we have this wonderful Scarlet Nance. This is one that I've grown many times before. It has a very snappy texture, sweet and delicious. It has that sort of blunted end, which is really nice for clay soils like I have. And then I have Littlefinger, which is wonderful in raised beds. Really nice little carrots that saute up really beautifully with some herbs and butter, like dill and butter. You don't have to even cut them because they're already like a baby carrot size. So I highly recommend trying out Littlefinger if you haven't. And then lastly, we have the Danvers. This one I like, I believe, yeah, that's why. This one is great for heavy soils, which is what I have. It's clay. But the thing that I really appreciate about them is that they do not crack as often as other carrots. And here, whenever we have rain, that clay soil soaks up so much water, it does lead to some carrots cracking. So Danvers 126, I'm growing it for its crack resistance. The last thing I'll mention is the All-American parsnip as a little bonus. These can be a little bit tricky to germinate. If you are going to try growing parsnips, you should soak the seeds first. It'll improve your odds of germination. But parsnips are actually quite good, especially if you grow them through the winter period. They'll pick up a little bit of sweetness and they're quite versatile in the kitchen. And if you live somewhere mild like I am here in San Diego, maybe even zone 9+, you can definitely get away with planting some green beans at this point of the year, and they should do just fine. Now I've chosen Jade because it has a little bit more cold tolerance, just in case. And then I have Taverna, which is a classic sort of filet bean, and then Gold Rush, which is a nice little yellow bean. Jade is the only one I know from this ones that I chose that could handle some amount of cold, and that is why I chose it. And the very final thing that I will be planting at this time period in particular is a cover crop of fava beans. That's why I'm here next to the tomatoes, because tomatoes take a lot of nutrients and they've been growing for a very long time. All of these tomatoes have been in the ground now since like March. So we're talking about like 6 months before they even, maybe 7 months before they come out of the ground. And what I could do in this time period while they're still taking up space is plant some fava beans along every single drip emitter next to the tomatoes, and that'll start growing. Once I remove the tomatoes, the fava beans will be there, start fixing nitrogen, start amending the soil, and then I could plant my brassicas around those fava beans and still make use of that space. So that is a great thing to do this time of year. Fava beans, you could also eat them, but they're really good at fixing nitrogen. The final thing to do is to go back through and bury all of these seeds that I've simply placed on the surface. Now, of course, remember, don't bury the ones that need light for germination, like the snapdragon or the lobelia. And the final thing I'll mention is that right now, birds are migrating and they might be hungry, maybe they won't be, but in my experience over the last couple months, I've lost a lot of seeds to birds. So what I've done is I built a little box out of wood, and then I put a little piece of hardware cloth on one side. This allows me to fit them right over my seedling trays like so, and that keeps all the birds out and will make sure that I didn't waste all my time today starting these seeds. Thank you guys for watching. This was a pretty long one. Let me know if you prefer these longer versions over the more rapid fire fast versions, but this was a lot of fun. A lot of seeds started, way more than I expected. I might not have to do as much on the next month, but thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.